Okay, so we got some big news to talk about today. This is one of those stories that makes me think, man, maybe we are being far too optimistic. Even the perma-bears, the so-called pessimists, self-proclaimed realists, preppers of the world, maybe our timelines are just too generous, and this thing could unfold much faster than anybody realizes. Now, this story is not being talked about across the Legacy 5 with the exception of a short segment, but a potent one on Fox News. Now, what we're going to talk about today is Los Angeles conducting nuclear detonation exercises next week. Should that raise an eyebrow in the context of the current global geopolitical turmoil? Well, only if you're paying attention, apparently, because not many people are talking about this. Los Angeles is going to be doing nuclear detonation wargaming next week. And it's not just the municipality. A coalition of federal, state, local, and military agencies are coming together in the Los Angeles area to learn strategies to manage a nuclear detonation. And I'm going to presume that if this is happening there, that this has happened in all of the other large, or will be happening soon, in the large municipalities across the United States and the West. Now, we're going to talk about some of the revelations of the statements of one of the coordinators of this event and why it's so important. And I want to quickly say before we dive into this and the other news stories of the day that I apologize for my absence in the last 72 hours. I am incredibly busy practicing what we preach on the channel. I'm trying to build out a self-reliant homestead. I acquired a property and we're trying to get everything at an accelerated pace ready to go before the shit hits the fan. It comes with a lot of responsibility. As the saying goes, you start off as a micro prepper and eventually all preppers become farmers, and that's what I am working towards in the next couple weeks, because we got to get seeds in the ground, we got to get greenhouses built. It's just going to be a fustercluck, and I'm going to be very busy. So these World War III daily updates, they're going to be kind of done on the fly. But I realize information is power, information is important, which is why I keep doing them. But we do have a lot of videos in the queue, blue strip content that you should be watching, that perennial content that is going to give you actual education and ideas on how you can actually prepare for this stuff, okay? Because most people, you're just not nearly as ready as you think. I wish it was still 10 years ago and I was in Bugout bag fantasy land, because the closer we get to this eventuality and the more prepared I get, the more scared I get, to be brutally honest. I'm going to be honest. I'm not trying to be a big tough guy here. Because I see all the angles of how this is going to play out. And what they're strategizing here is very concerning. On the one hand, I'm happy they're doing it because at least the government is starting to take this a little bit seriously. On the other hand, it's a symbol or signal that they are actually taking the threat seriously and they think it's something that is plausible and possible. Los Angeles nuclear detonation wargaming next week. A coalition of federal, state, and local and military agencies are coming together in the Los Angeles area to learn strategies to manage a nuclear detonation. So this is going to try to develop an interface not only between all the various levels of government, but also the public and private sector. Guys, they're taking this seriously. This is not your run-of-the-mill annual exercise, okay? This is a unprecedented exercise, at least within our generation, since the Cold War, that they are coming together and they're trying to work out all the bugs of the civil defense infrastructure. Now, this is designed to equip local and state authorities with all the tools that they're going to need to mitigate a nuclear attack. Now, when we talk about this, I want you to remember the backdrop of geopolitical crises unfolding around the world, but also remember what the FBI director has been saying repeatedly for the last few months, that he believes the threat of terrorist attack or attack against the United States, maybe even by a nation state, is the highest that we've ever seen it before. We know the threat of nuclear war is higher than ever before, but we also know, according to him, that the threat level is higher than ever before. In fact, he says that the next attack is going to be on a whole other level. That's an exact quote, a whole other level. Not even will 9/11 compare? Now, will this be a nationwide cyber attack? Will this be a coordinated and synchronized mass shooting incident across multiple cities? Is this going to be some sort of major attack on critical infrastructure, on the power grid, or is this actually going to be a radiological incident, maybe a dirty bomb or a nuclear event? Now, the thing that stands out to me with respect to this is they're not talking about a radiological incident. Okay, this is not about what do we do if the nuclear power plants melt down or if there's a nuclear incident. They're not talking about a dirty bomb. They're talking about a nuclear detonation. Now, to me, when you see all of the military exercise, the National Guard exercises, you're seeing snipers on the rooftop in across college campuses, which is just insane. Whether you agree with that or not, just remember, okay, everybody's like, oh, I'm so glad that we're going to have X as the one app to rule them all. And, you know, you're going to do your payments on there, and it's going to be the video platform. It's going to be the whole 9 yards. But what happens when the benevolent dictator, you know, leaves that role as leading the company? Who are they going to put in next? Okay, what are you going to do when snipers on the rooftop comes and it's not in your favor? What about the National Guard being deployed in the New York subways with fully automatic rifles? Okay, now they've taken away the fully automatic rifles, but all this stuff starts to look like they're preparing for a big attack. It may be an isolated nuclear attack, or it may not. It may be a Jericho-like scenario. If you've never seen the TV show Jericho, it was a terrorist attack that happened where multiple cities across the United States were attacked with a nuclear weapon, but there was plausible deniability. They didn't know who exactly did it, and that's the problem with an isolated nuclear attacks where they're not actually launched from another nation state. This is a big problem, and this is one of those things that not a lot of people have really mentally exercised. A lot of us think of, well, it's going to be, you know, a full-on mutually assured destruction, or it's going to be a limited tit-for-tat nuclear strike. Even the facilitator of this exercise, Hal Kempfer, who's a national security analyst who has helped coordinating this whole exercise between all these various branches of government and the private sector, even he is saying now, and this is one of the things that stood out to me, is that, how is he saying that? He is saying that unlike the Cold War era, many people will survive nuclear war, and we need to be ready for that. Now, I'm not stunned that he's saying it in the sense that this is not something I've considered before, that we may well see a more limited nuclear strike, and that the concerns about nuclear winter are overblown. It's not that I haven't thought about that. It's that a guy that is this well connected, who's actually helping coordinate this whole thing, is saying that. He goes on to say the following: don't believe sci-fi movies. The reality of a nuclear detonation is that most people will survive. Most people will survive. To me, that is terrifying. I mean, most people, if you're in the blast zone, he's not talking about you. You're going to catch the 1,000,000-degree suntan and you're going to be vaporized in an instant, okay? And for some people, that's what they're banking on because they just don't have the mental fortitude or the provisions necessary in order to ride something like this out. But what he is saying is, unlike Annie Jacobsen in her recent book, Nuclear War, which is very well written, very well informed, and probably one of the most well-researched books on the topic to date, unlike what she is saying, where she's thinking it's going to be the end of the world and it's going to be back to the Stone Ages, which very well could be, what he's saying is that we may see something more limited. So some people think that nuclear war is going to be no big deal, like the new generation who has no exposure to duck and cover in the Cold War era. They just perceive nukes to be something that you use in a video game and the guy, you know, walks through the fallout unscathed. Then there's another class of thinking that views it as the end of the world, nuclear winter. You know, the crops will never grow again, and even the babies that are born in the future generation, they're going to be all deformed. Now, there's an in-between there, okay? And what's concerning is what he is saying is they're framing it now and getting people ready or not people, but they're getting ready for a limited nuclear attack. So they understand that the threat now could be asymmetrical. Okay, it could come in the form of something that comes over in a shipping container, or something that is domestically created. And, it could emerge as a isolated set of incidents that is not necessarily going to thrust the United States into disarray, not a full-blown mutually assured destruction, EMP in tow. It may not necessitate the collapse of the national power grid, but when you have nuclear detonations happening like that in multiple areas at once, it will be Mad Max more or less. And in many cases, that's going to be even a more difficult situation to navigate, because you're going to see martial law, snipers on the rooftops, National Guard with fully armed machine guns, in all aspects of social life where there is still some measure of authority being imposed. And for me, like I say, I wish I was still at the level of Fantasyland Bugout bag 10 years ago, because what I'm seeing right now as we approach the 0 day, and as I get more prepared and more aware of what it's going to take to actually survive what's coming, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying knowing what we're going to have to deal with. I almost wish I was that naive guy with a Bugout bag right now, because there's a sense of dread that accompanies when you really start to understand what's going on. And I don't know if I'm doing justice in my communication of that to the audience. A lot of people who meet me, they think maybe Nate's just, being an alarmist, or people who are in my acquaintance circle who think this is all just a racket, all just a gag, to sell survival products. And I just remind them that, look, I wish it was. But at my innermost core, what's motivated me to prepare for so long is that I've seen the fragility of all of these institutions and the instability, be it in a national sense or a international sense. And I understand that we're just reaching all these tipping points as a species. Anyways, not to go on a long-winded sidebar, but the fact that they're preparing for this so openly. And while this is a story that's going to be missed by the majority of the mainstream, and maybe we'll talk about it as the exercise unfolds in the week ahead, this is not just, a nothing burger bullshit that is being, a bunch of NGO wannabes. This is the real deal. In fact, they do have a video that they release, which is very high production, which shows representatives from these various levels of government talking about the exercise in more depth. So I'm concerned here. I'm concerned that what we're being set up for is a big, big black swan that nobody can anticipate. Everybody right now is thinking about, either a big nuclear war. They're thinking about maybe terrorist attacks in the sense of attacks on the power grid, attacks on, various, mass shooting incidents or something like that. Nobody's really thinking about, well, maybe people have in the past, but it's not the flavor of the month to be concerned about an actual isolated nuclear event, a 9/11 of that scale. And maybe that's what the FBI director is referring to. Now, when things get hot overseas, as they will, that's when they're going to start activating a lot of the sleeper cells. And there's a lot of sleeper cells in the United States. And, there's some conspiracy theorists who believe that that's what they're banking on. So then they can bring in draconian laws that are going to make COVID look like a walk in the park. A lot of the COVID stuff was a little bit sensationalized. I mean, yeah, there were police that were tackling people on the beach and stuff like that. But by and large, you more or less still had your freedoms. You just had to wear a mask in certain places, and, you couldn't work if you didn't do certain things. But I think what could be coming, could be much, much worse. And the fact that we've so easily acquiesced and accepted snipers on the rooftops, whether you agree with those people or not, that is terrifying. That level of the militarization of police should be concerning to people. And quite frankly, historically speaking, at Kent State or otherwise, if you needed riot police to defend your position. And if the International Criminal Court was contemplating issuing arrest warrants for your leaders, then maybe you're the asshole in the equation. Just something to think about. Little personal opinion sidebar there, which I'm fully entitled to because this is my channel, and I quite frankly don't give a shit at this point in time because I'm preparing to go off grid. Now, there's a lot more news to cover that is related to this. Alabama National Guard exercises. They claim the public should not be alarmed by an influx of uniformed Alabama National Guard personnel and vehicles, or by National Guard or local healthcare personnel in personnel protective equipment. Do they mean CBRN? I don't know. Multiple organizations will be participating in disaster preparation exercises, along with multiple members of mobile county healthcare and emergency response coalitions. You have this re-emphasis on the National Guard in multiple states. For example, Greg Abbott using the border crisis in an attempt to bolster those forces. Construction continues on the forward operating base in Eagle Pass. This base will house thousands of Texas National Guard soldiers responding to President Biden's ongoing border crisis. So you see, they need these threats to increase the militarization of these various levels of government that are going to be required when the real war starts. So it's almost like the more domestic threats, the better you get set up for the external threats. This particular base is expected to house 1,800 Texas National Guard troops as part of the state's border security initiative, and could cost upward of $400 million by September of 2026. And another thing to consider, you know, I've been doing videos on the movie Civil War recently because I think it's an excellent fictional case study, although I think it's very plausible. You know, they could be, all of these National Guard outposts could be the states preparing for when the U.S. government actually collapses at the federal level, and that they have to take the situation into their own hands. Because, of course, in terms of civil defense, when it comes down to a full-blown nuclear war, if it unfolds, the people who are going to be making the rules are not the federal government, because they're not going to have the capability, okay? They're not going to have the infrastructure, the communications, and the resources necessary to police the entire nation. They're going to rely on the states and the counties and the municipalities, and the good old boy club are going to be taking it into their own hands. And this is what you're going to have to contend with. So this is why you need to start getting ready on a self-subsistence community level. And it takes a lot of work to truly ride out what's coming. It's going to take a lot of work. Now, that's just one part of what's going on. Don't worry, the government has a plan for themselves. They're building a new doomsday plane, a $13 billion contract to the Sierra Nevada Corporation to develop a state-of-the-art E-4B nuclear doomsday aircraft, I should say, capable of operating in a nuclear war. So they got their own bunkers, they got their own doomsday planes, but they don't even have the decency to really advise the public to prepare for a nuclear event. Now, even this guy who is facilitating this event is only saying have 72 hours worth of food. We encourage people to have 72 hours worth of supplies. Who the hell doesn't have 72 hours worth of food in their house? Really? I mean, even if you can't afford 72 hours worth of food, you should have 72 hours because you should be buying bulk. You should be, you know, if you're struggling to get by, you need to go down to the wholesale place. You need to buy a 40-pound bag of rice and learn to mix and match that and budget, because you can still get that for rock bottom prices relative to what's coming. And if you don't have more than 72 hours, I mean, this whole 72-hour rule is just silly. What are they referring to? Medication? Who doesn't have more than 72 hours worth of their chronic medication? Who doesn't, I mean, who's even going to need 72 hours worth of power? So the 72-hour rule is bullshit. It's dumb. Maybe with the exception of like floods, you should be able to survive on your rooftop until a helicopter can come and get you. If you're talking about a nuclear detonation, you need to prepare for months months. Don't even call yourself a prepper if you do not have months worth of food stored, at least if you're preparing for one of these instances. Now, I mean, most people, I used to go to the grocery store once every 1 or 2 weeks. So most people should have 2 weeks worth of food. Unless you're counting your 2-week food supply as additive to that, then okay, you know, maybe most people have like 2 months and plus 3 days, or a month, 2 weeks plus 3 days. I don't know. Anyways, there's a lot of other news to cover, so I got to get to this because I got other shit to do. I'm talking tractor, the whole 9 yards. Guys, I'm building out a homestead, and we're going to try to share the experience with you to the extent that is operationally, securely feasible from my security point of view. Now, Belarus claims they have several dozen nuclear weapons and is warning the West of an apocalypse. Now, I knew that Belarus had a few nukes, but I didn't think they had several dozen nuclear weapons. So this is new information to me. Vladimir Putin's closest ally, Lukashenko, has warned that Belarus now has several dozen nuclear weapons and has moved 2 battalions of combat-ready troops to the western NATO border. And this is in response to when Poland announced that they are ready to receive NATO nuclear weapons. So it seems like we could be entering a situation here where Poland and Belarus are going to be the next sacrificial proxy lambs in this equation, and that they may go to nuclear war, or a limited nuclear war. Now, I think if you ask people in Poland if they support such measures, most are going to say no, and it's still on the fence in terms of whether it's still up in the air, I should say, as to whether or not they're going to bring nuclear weapons in. But the fact that the conversation has become more out there in the public forums, we were talking about this months ago when it was first brought to our attention by our sources in Poland, but now, of course, the discourse has become fairly pronounced in the media cycle, and it's looking like it's only going to continue to ramp up if they don't already have plans to have those weapon systems there already. We know they have the deployment systems en route, and they have the F-16s, so they pretty much already could field the B-61 tactical gravity bombs, the new revised version that the U.S. military is providing to a lot of the people in its nuclear sharing program. Well, Poland wants in on that, and that, of course, is upping the nuclear ante even one more. Now, Belarus is saying that they prevented drone attacks from Lithuania. This is a pretty big escalation if true. They're saying that attacks by combat drones from the territory of Lithuania on objects in Minsk and its suburbs were halted. Lithuania has denied these allegations and added that Vilnius and Poland are allowing extremists into their countries to attack Belarus with drones. So Belarus is saying that it's not necessarily the Lithuanian government that is doing this, but extremists within Lithuania are the ones who are carrying out these attacks. So we can see how potentially another theater of escalation could potentially open up. The ICC may issue arrest warrants for the Israeli government. I'm really not sure what to make of this, to be honest. Is this just another attempt to create a good cop, bad cop scenario? Or is the West looking for an out here and potentially looking for a scapegoat in the Netanyahu government? I do believe that the Israeli strategy and the Israeli mission as a whole is going to continue, but maybe that means that they're going to have to throw the current Israeli government, be it comprised of Netanyahu and Gallant and all his counterparts, under the bus in order to see the plan through to fruition. So it's going to be interesting to see what develops. Passover is ending tomorrow, which means that we could very well see another rung up the escalation ladder between Iran and Israel. Because, of course, remember, there were rumors before that Israel was not going to conduct its main retaliatory response until after Passover was completed. Now, one thing I forgot about what's going on in Poland on the Polish-Belarusian front right now is that the Polish army is currently offering training to all citizens aged 18 or 15 to 65 in the event of emergency situations. The first training session is going to start on May 11th, 2024. So they're giving people an option. You can come and volunteer, and you can check out, what the military is up to and what you can do in the event of an emergency situation. So right now, it's still in the optional phase, priming people for when it's not an option anymore. And the situation resembles that of what is unfolding in Ukraine. Poland apparently has backtracked on its agreement with the Ukrainian government to deport Ukrainians who fled to Poland to try to flee conscription. They initially were going to start sending them back, capture them and send them back, but now apparently they're sort of waffling on the issue, so I wouldn't be surprised if they still do. They're just going to keep it down on the low. Now, China is currently stockpiling resources around the world and building strategic reserves of raw materials. Get a load of this. In recent months, mainland China has been actively increasing its strategic reserves of various resources and raw materials. Beijing is buying the following materials and minerals: oil, gas, coal, various metals, including gold, that we'll talk about in just a moment, in large quantities, as well as hoarding lithium, rare earth metals, and many other materials that you would need for wartime. Western experts, the media, and the anti-Chinese public around the world see this as preparation for a possible future conflict. Well, with Blinken's terrible visit and performance in China recently, I'm pretty sure that is now almost guaranteed. We'll talk about that in just a moment as well. In this regard, it's not surprising that the recently built storage facilities in China, with a capacity of 31.5 million barrels, are filling with Russian oil, providing additional benefits due to lower prices. Moreover, current estimates indicate that China's strategic oil reserves may exceed similar reserves in the United States. And of course, they would need to, because they have a much larger population. Their energy needs are going to be much higher. And the United States does have more domestic sources of oil that are still in the ground. And that is the best way to have a strategic oil reserve, is to keep it in the ground and not pump it in the first place and keep buying oil from abroad. And you gotta give it to the big strategic thinkers in the United States who understand this, and this is probably the only reason why they haven't went for the Alaskan oil yet, because they know it's cheaper to put it in the ground and get as much oil as we can from everybody else before World War III starts, because when it starts, you're going to be relying, and when the petrodollar collapses and they nationalize oil once again, that's when they're going to rely on that oil, okay, in order to maintain the economy and prevent the peasants from revolting. China is also buying up lithium mines. This metal is essential for batteries and processing plants around the world. Beijing continues to increase its gold reserves against the backdrop of an escalation of tension artificially created by the United States and its partners, that very pro-Chinese source claims. Now, NATO is saying that China must cut trade with Russia, or else we will ensure that we will, as Blinken had said. Now, this is the exact same kind of language we've seen with Nord Stream. I can't remember the exact quote, but I remember President Biden saying something to the effect, if Nord Stream goes through, we will ensure that it is a failure, or something to that effect. And sure enough, a few years go by and they blow it up. Well, that's not official. That has not been proven officially, but we can pretty much ascertain, if you believe the great Seymour Hersh, then that they did in fact have something to do with that, what was obviously an attack. Okay, it wasn't an accident, it was an attack. And the language that we're seeing is very similar to that. So Blinken is saying, if the Russians and the Chinese don't sever these trade relations, then we will. Now, what does he mean by that? Okay. And of course, he was not well received in China, and he said a lot of things that were very confrontational while he was there and immediately upon his return. And now he is saying that the Chinese are trying to meddle with the elections. So Anthony Blinken is saying that there's evidence that China is attempting to interfere with elections. So not the Russians now, but the Chinese. And if you think that Trump's going to figure this all out, unfortunately, you better keep on prepping, because Trump plans on sanctioning the countries that refuse to use the dollar, for which there are many right now. In fact, many African countries are repatriating their gold reserves from the US. Why you would put them there in the first place, I have no idea. I guess they feel that it's a safe haven, but they're repatriating their gold, okay? And what Trump is saying is that if you don't continue to trade in the US dollar, well, we're going to sanction you. As the United States has recently seized Russian assets and the Russians are responding in kind, it's very likely, and this is not just from me, this is from high-level macroeconomists and very wealthy people, they think that the seizure of Russian assets was the death of the American dollar. And it's going to take some time to materialize, but very few countries are going to entrust the Americans again if they continue down this road. And I don't mean the Americans like you and me, I'm talking about the leadership and maybe beyond the leadership, if you know what I'm saying. The Chinese gold buying spree continues. Now, they've added 300 tons of gold to its reserve since October of 2022, but that is just the official amount, okay? It is possible that the total reserves actually exceed 5,300 tons, which is 2.5 times higher than the official data. That is from Russian Pravda, a pro-Kremlin, likely pro-Chinese source. But what that would mean is that the Chinese are approaching, they still got a way to go, but approaching parity with the United States, who claims to have 8,100 tons of gold. However, there's never been an audit in recent years, not for decades, I think. And for that reason, who knows where and how much gold is actually there in Fort Knox or the Federal Reserve Bank under the ground in New York City. It's difficult to know, but we know that the Chinese are driving that price higher and higher. And now Dmitry Peskov, who's the Kremlin spokesperson, is saying that the seizure of Russian assets is going to be the nail in the coffin for the US dollar. Here's another potential inflection point in the Middle East. That pier that's being built for Gaza relief recently came under attack by mortar fire. The IDF forces that are preparing for the U.S. pier in Gaza came under attack, and this is going to be a tripwire because you already have Britain saying that's going to send troops into the Gaza Strip to deliver humanitarian aid. I don't see how that's going to go over well, especially seeing as there's still tens of thousands of members of Hamas there, and you've probably created at least 1.5 million more. Whoever remains are going to be militants in waiting. Everybody who's lost a child now has probably nothing left to lose but to join Hamas, okay? So this is going to be a tripwire for U.S. involvement in the coming conflict. UK defense officials have told the BBC that they're considering the deployment of British ground troops into central Gaza to assist in the transport and distribution of humanitarian aid and military logistics, blah, blah, blah. They're basically, it's the first leg of a military base and a permanent military presence in that region, I do believe. You got Emmanuel Macron talking about why the EU needs its own nuclear umbrella, because they're quite concerned that the US may abandon them. So they need something beyond Article 5 in order to ensure the collective security of the region and ensure deterrence of the Russian threat as they frame it. So Macron wants to start discussions on a European defense, including nuclear weapons. And of course, France is the only EU nuclear nation. Of course, Brexit, the English are no longer a part of the EU. but of course they have nuclear weapons and are allied with France as well, but that France would be one of the biggest nuclear powers, with the exception of the United States and its various nuclear tactical bombs that are spread across Europe. And I wasn't aware of this before, that the French nuclear doctrine is actually somewhat different. They have something called medium-range air-to-surface missile. Is a French nuclear air-launched cruise missile. And it's not that this is the only thing that they have, but the Air Sol Moyenne Portée ASMP. In French, the nuclear doctrine is referred to as a pre-strategic weapon. A pre-strategic weapon, okay? The last resort warning shot prior to full-scale employment of strategic nuclear weapons launched from Triumphant-class ballistic missile submarines. So it's not a actual strategic weapon in their view. They actually view these nukes, that some might call tactical nukes, as a preemptive weapon, okay, as a pre-strategic weapon, I should say. We have a lot of video that I would like to share with you tonight, including North Korea displaying new camouflage missile launchers. We know that the Iranians and the North Koreans have both showcased a lot of advanced missile launching tech that can be deployed in shipping containers or semi-trucks. And now they're trying to integrate this into farm equipment. So you could see how this would complicate the battlefield, especially in the civilian space. So imagine a Hamas scenario where they're embedded within the civilian population, but to a much greater degree and a much more sophisticated degree, where a lot of the heavy machinery that they use for farming or critical infrastructure maintenance, like a fire truck, anything, an ambulance, could have a missile launcher in it. And this is definitely a warning to the West that if they do partake in a war with North Korea or Iran, there's going to be as many asymmetrical components as there are conventional ones. I found this statistic to be very interesting. Did you know that it took the USA 220 years to reach $11 trillion of debt? Okay, 220 years. And it took them and since 2020, okay, so for the last 4 years, we've added an equivalent amount of debt. Okay, so an $11 trillion accrued debt over 220 years up until like 2010. And then in between 2010 and 2020, you added another 11 trillion-ish, 13 trillion. And in just the last 3 or 4 years, okay, so this is the exponential curve if I ever seen one. So this is accelerating. This is hyperinflation. The only thing that is keeping it down is the Fed and the U.S. military and U.S. hegemony and just the dominance that the United States has economically and militarily around the world. Without that, I mean, it's over. We still have attacks on Russian oil refineries. In fact, there was another big one last night that, of course, went unreported. And a lot of other stuff happening, which is why you need to keep on prepping. Now, you can still get 15% off Peak Refuel food. You can go to their website, or you can go to CanadianPreparedness.com if you're in Canada. I would encourage you to go to CanadianPreparedness.com. If you want to get 15% off their website, go check that out. They're having a spring sale right now. This is the best tasting stuff. I eat it. It's like a meal replacement, but not really a meal replacement because it's a meal. But even the price of it now, you go out to eat at any fast food restaurant and you're really spending $20 for a meal. So you can get something like this for $20 that's going to last. Officially, it's only going to last for 5 years, but this is fully freeze-dried food, all freeze-dried components, no dehydrated stuff mixed in there like some companies do. That's delicious, that's in a Mylar sealed bag. This will last 25 years, okay? The only reason why they don't have that on the label is because you need some special laboratory certification. But if they wanted to, they could put no expiration date on there because that is legal to do. And they wouldn't be lying because freeze-dried food, if properly stored in a Mylar bag, will last 25 to 30 years. I would recommend, if you wanted something that's higher quality, that was not just for if the world ended, but something that you could use on a every other day basis, go with Peak Refuel. NUTRISTORE, freeze-dried wholesale foods is another one that we've worked with. Mountain House is great. Happy Yak is decent. You know, all of these companies are great, the ones that you'll find on CanadianPreparedness.com. But capitalize on that deal. It ends, I believe, tomorrow. Okay, I got to go, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.